so milked you can make an argument it's more talked about than the Napoleonic Wars and the French Revolution combined. For instance, this video alone was an hour and a half long. And for a good reason too. I mean, like, who doesn't like the Civil War? It's action-packed and has everything you want for a war, and or a cool story. How did the Civil War manage to have one of the stupidest, if not the stupidest historical figure in the entire 19th century? Well, that's what I'm about to explain to you, so just sit back, relax, and listen. Oh, and please subscribe. George McClellan entered his life in 1826 and was the son of another man, whose name is also George McClellan. He proceeded to then graduate from West Point in 1846 and fought in the Mexican-American War, where he was a pre-vet second lieutenant and was promoted to a captain because of his bravery and skill. Now, I don't know where they got bravery from, because the man was as cautious as a senile snail. But on the other hand, I just really don't know where they came up with skill. The most skillful thing he's ever been good at was when he convinced Abraham Lincoln to let him not do anything for like the billionth time. Anyways, afterward, he became the chief engineer of the Central Illinois Railroad, clearly the most prestigious of titles. But he did not stop there. Oh, no, he did not stop there. He proceeded to become the vice president of the Central Illinois Railroads, an even more prestigious title. After all of that, George immediately retired as soon as the American Civil War began and entered the Army, when he was accepted as a general-in-chief of the Union Army because this dude, whose name is General Winfield Scott, lost a major battle in the Civil War called Bull Run, causing Old Abe to get rid of Old Scott and then replace him with young McClellan. His first order of business was to do absolutely nothing and chill and train the forces he currently had, and that was basically his entire plan for the war. But then Old Abe had to change his course of directions by telling him that you actually have to do something in a war, but Abe's decision was unpopular. I wonder why. You, there, Union soldier, go to fight the Confederates in a battle. Huh? No, he doesn't have to fight in a battle. He can just wait here and chill with me, bruh. For an entire year of inactivity, Old Abe had it with McClellan's dilly-dallying and firmly forced him to move south towards the Confederate capital of Richmond in a campaign they called the Peninsula Campaign. But George had different plans. He planned to go from the southeast and use the sea to reach the wanted position. Now at this point, Old Abe was just happy that McClellan would attack the enemy in the first place, which is kind of the point of a war. However, when McClellan finally landed, he found a small force of Confederate soldiers. They had approximately 12,000 soldiers compared to McClellan's 50 to 70,000 soldiers. However, the Confederate leader, Magruder, tricked McClellan by making his forces look bigger than they were with deception and trickery. Also, George expected to have access to Lee's mill, but in a move that surprised basically no one, the Confederates took a defensive stance there. After just kind of sitting around, McClellan decided to get in an artillery duel. With a bit of reconnaissance, McClellan did indeed find out that the Confederates had big, scary fortifications, and upon learning that, McClellan decided that he wouldn't give them battle, and instead siege them. McClellan, preparing for the siege, started building siege fortifications, and he positioned his heavy siege guns to the front of the fort. In the meantime, a certain Joseph E. Johnston brought reinforcements for the Confederate side. The Union Army actually probed the Confederate Army line. However, the Union Army failed to exploit the success, but it let McClellan stay there for another 2 weeks. In the meantime, he tried convincing the U.S. Navy to ascend the Yorktown River and flank the enemy from the side. However, that was a really dumb idea, because the Confederates had stationed big scary guns there blocking the path. And unless you want a free ticket to heaven, you probably shouldn't go there. Go throw yourself at certain death. Okay. Good boy. Obviously, the Navy did not comply, so McClellan was off on his own devices. So he decided that on May 5th he would do a massive bombardment with cannon shells. However, the Confederate Army slipped away to Williamsburg 2 days prior, on May 3rd. And that was the end of the siege of Yorktown. The conclusion of it is a lot of missed opportunities, 2 weeks wasted, and McClellan showing his stupidity. After Magruder moved his forces to Williamsburg, George McClellan moved into Yorktown and called it a massive success, and even called it brilliant when he kind of just sat around for 2 weeks and missed multiple opportunities to defeat the enemy soundly. See, there's something you gotta understand about McClellan. He thinks that he is America's greatness and savior, and as such, he's maddeningly cautious because he thinks that if he dies, then the American Union will die, or something like that. On one occasion, Abraham Lincoln wanted to talk to him about something, but McClellan was late, and when he finally showed up, he just straight up went to bed without speaking a single word to the President of the United States. That's the level of ego and disrespectful we're talking about here. The Battle of Williamsburg is one of the true successes of McClellan's career, because if it wasn't, it would literally make him one of the worst generals in history, and that is because he had double the amount of forces than his enemy, with approximately 40,000 to the Confederate 17,000. McClellan pushed them back, continuing their withdrawal. However, yet again, this victory was not exploited like it should have been. After this half-decent victory, McClellan followed it up with one of the best victories in the American Civil War, except for the Southern Confederate side. This battle was the Battle of Richmond, Kentucky, where McClellan moved ahead against Edmund Kirby Smith, but when McClellan tried to flank Smith, he was firmly held back, and McClellan did about the stupidest thing he could have. That was, instead of going into a battle against the army, instead prepare for a lengthy siege like he did with Yorktown. But this wasn't Yorktown. This was a whole nother ballgame. The general that was leading the Confederate Army was one certain Robert E. Lee, who was an amazing tactician and very adept at anticipating his enemy's plan and personality. General Robert E. Lee knew that McClellan was weak, stupid, ignorant, and arrogant. He used this to his advantage. After moving a famous commander called Stonewall Jackson south to push back McClellan, the Union forces finally gave way to General Robert E. Lee. The forces retreated before they made a last stand at their old bivouac, which just means semi-permanent military camp. But that attempt also failed, so they kept on retreating, and this turned into the 7 Days Battles, which was 6 different battles over the course of 7 days, hence the name of it. 7 Days Battle began on June 25th with the first battle called the Battle of Oak Grove, where McClellan was soundly defeated. He then retreated back until Lee began a series of attacks in the Battle of Beaver Dam Creek, where again McClellan was soundly defeated. The next few battles were all losses for the Union, Gaines Mill, Savage's Station, and many more. Finally, after all those defeats, McClellan got one victory, which was the Battle of Malvern Hill. But that victory wasn't because McClellan came up with some clever plan. Instead, it was because there was a couple of poorly executed orders, and Stonewall Jackson's troops were forced to be delayed. Nevertheless, a victory is still a victory, and McClellan was able to retreat out of the peninsula, making it back to Washington, D.C. Overall, the Peninsula Campaign was a massive failure for the Union and showcased McClellan's incapability as a leader and a general. Despite that, McClellan still had the audacity to call it a success, even though at one point he lost 6 battles in a row, which most people don't tend to say that's a success. The next major battle would be the best victory McClellan had ever achieved. It would be the Battle of Antietam, when General E. Lee would go north to invade Washington, D.C., but McClellan and the North as a whole had massive luck on their side, because in a field wrapped around a cigar were Robert E. Lee's battle plans, and some Union soldiers discovered them, meaning that the path for victory was literally written out for them. So all McClellan had to do was just not be a complete idiot, and this one time he wasn't a complete idiot, winning the battle and saving his legacy. However, after he won the battle, he refused to chase down the enemy, for only God knows why. That was the last straw for Abraham Lincoln, who deposed him as General-in-Chief. Eventually, McClellan decided to run for president. Like I said, he thought he was America's greatest and savior. Of course, he didn't win. I wonder why. I will do stuff and I will do blah 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 blah. 7 years ago, the founding fathers said all men were created equally, with unalienable rights. Also, a house divided against itself cannot stand. In conclusion, that's all I have to say about McClellan. I'm kind of sick of researching him and talking about him, so that's all I really have to say. Maybe he was the stupidest historical figure in the 19th century. Who's to say?